Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And members, I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing. Certainly, it's not expected of the Intelligence Committee, and I'm very pleased that we have so many members present today. And I'd like to beg your indulgence. I know you spoke of a time limit, but it is very difficult to talk about all of this information in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I possibly can. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'm here today to testify about the failure of the Central Intelligence Agency to conduct a serious and thorough investigation into the allegations of CIA involvement in cocaine trafficking to fund its contra-war activities. Unfortunately, my fear that the CIA would be unable to investigate itself has been confirmed with this report. The Inspector General's report lacks credibility. It is fraught with contradictions and illogical conclusions. In a September 3rd, 1996 memo, then CIA Director John Deutsch laid out the framework for this investigation. In his instructions to CIA Inspector General Frederick P. Hitz, Director Deutsch stated, "I have no reason to believe that there's any substance to the allegations published in the Mercury News." Despite his premature conclusion, a serious, substantial, and credible investigation and interview process would have proven him wrong. If the CIA director's premature conclusion was meant to direct the final outcome, he has succeeded. This report's sweeping denial of the CIA's knowledge of drug trafficking related to the Contras defies the evidence and the logic that the CIA should have known. From the days of the CIA's first response to the allegations raised in the Dark Alliance series, many skeptics believe that the CIA could never produce a credible or truthful review of wrongdoings by its own agency. These skeptics could point, if they'd like, to this Sunday's Los Angeles Times to confirm their fears. The Times reported, in another case, that after 37 years, the CIA finally admitted publicly the most profound deception imaginable on an American family. Thomas Pete Ray and his top secret squadron of National Guard bombers were shot down during a CIA bombing mission in the Bay of Pigs debacle. For 37 years, the CIA denied that Mr. Ray and his squadron even existed, much less were shot down by Cuban troops in 1961. Only this month, faced with a document obtained by Freedom of Information Act request by the National Security Archives, did the CIA finally admit the truth 37 years later. 37 years later, about the allegations raised in the Dark Alliance series,
they're going to say that about the experiment
could have in any way
40
been
years from now
in or had knowledge
give y'all an
of drug
apology.
trafficking has caused me to spend much of my own time and resources to find out more about these allegations.
Well, what happened, Maxine? What, you gave up on the fight?
I interviewed Gary Webb, the writer of the series. And by the way, Mr. Chairman and members, Mr.
Crossing
Gary
the
Webb
border
is
with
here today.
fentanyl.
He's sitting
They had that
right
fentanyl,
here
though,
in this seat,
Maxine.
and I invited him
You
to come.
protecting them illegal migrants, though,
Maxine.
Maxine.
He's put a lot of time and work into this investigation, and I have been working with him since the first day that I read it, and I think that he should be privy to all information as he continues his work in this area. I interviewed Gary Webb, the writer of the series. I invited him to come to my district in South Central Los Angeles to respond to questions from local residents. My community encouraged my investigation and supported me in my efforts to delve deeper into these allegations. I personally interviewed a number of key figures in the Dark Alliance series. I first met with and interviewed Mr. Alan Finster, who was the attorney for Ricky Ross. Then I drove to San Diego to the Metropolitan Detention Center, where I interviewed Mr. Ricky Ross, the young man who was trafficking in drugs in South Central Los Angeles that were being sold to him by Mr. Nolan Meneses and Mr. Danilo Blandone. He was being held in the Metropolitan Metropolitan Detention Center facility on drug charges. I also then drove to a restaurant in the Valley where I met with Mr. Celerino Castillo, the DEA agent who had investigated the drug trafficking operation at Ilopango Airfield in El Salvador. Castillo had documented that the CIA directed this drug trafficking operation out of two hangars using Contra Supply Network as a route for shipping drugs into the United States. I then interviewed former LAPD officer Mike Rupert, who states he was forced to leave the LAPD after he uncovered a connection between the CIA and narcotic trafficking operations in California and Louisiana. Mr. Rupert also was interviewed by the CIA for its report. I met and had numerous telephone conversations with Mr. Jerry Gazzetta, a detective with the city of Bell and a key member of the multi-agency task force working with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department investigating the Blandon narcotics operation. Gazzetta was a level 1 informant whose information was the basis of the affidavit of LA Sheriff Tom Gorton that resulted in the October 1986 raid of the Blandon operation's 14 sites in Southern California. I visited the records division of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department and uncovered the sheriff's reports regarding the October 1986 drug bust. I was the first to obtain the copies of the documentation regarding the raids. They had said prior to that time that they did not exist, they could not be found, and I literally went in and by accident I was able to access these documents, and they quickly tried to retrieve them from me, and of course I refused to leave until I had copies of what should have been public documents. Using my own personal funds, I flew to Nicaragua to meet with Enrique Miranda Jaime, a former Sandinista official and drug partner of Norman Meneses, a central figure in the allegations in the Dark Alliance series. I was contacted by someone who had information about the Colombian cartels and their connection to Norman Meneses. When I arrived in Nicaragua, I was taken to the prison in the town of Grenada by State Department representatives where I met with Miranda himself. Mr. Miranda told me some of the information that he gave to the CIA in this investigation, which is reported on pages 54 and 55 of the IG's report. Mr. Miranda currently is in prison after being convicted for smuggling 764 kilos of cocaine with his partner Norman Meneses. Meneses told Miranda in detail that Meneses worked for the Contras and that his drug trafficking operation had the support of the CIA. Meneses also told Miranda that he was receiving support directly from Oliver North and passing on the funds to support Contra groups. I met with Mr. Thomas Borge, a former Sandinista interior minister and head of intelligence. Mr. Borge came to meet with me from Nicaragua to South Central Los Angeles and waited for hours until I completed a day-long schedule, and I then spent some 4 hours with him. I've also had numerous telephone conversations with Corel Talavera Baca, the girlfriend of Rafael Cornejo, who was a relative and part of Norman Meneses' drug trafficking organization, as well as a longtime business partner of Danilo Blandon, another central figure in the Dark Alliance series. I received information from Ms. Baca and Mr. Cornejo, who were connected to Carlos Ledera, a Colombian drug dealer and co-founder of the Medellin cartel. It was through Ledera's private island that the Medellin cartel moved massive amounts of cocaine to Miami and the United States. Ms. Baca had visited Carlos Ledera's private island and have information regarding the connection between Mr. Ledera and Norman Meneses. I've had over a half dozen telephone conversations with her, and she has sent me information relative to that operation. I have looked into many of the main allegations raised in Gary Webb's series, and I've thoroughly reviewed the Inspector General's report. In addition, I have read many letters and reviewed volumes of information sent to me and have visited a large number of people who have claimed to have information about the drug dealing in South Central Los Angeles. In my informed opinion, Mr. Chairman, the CIA IG report and the investigation lacks credibility, and its conclusions must be dismissed. Let me turn to some of the specifics of the Inspector General's report. The average reader likely will find the structure of this report bizarre and confusing. I also question the report's methodology, its sweeping conclusions, its cleverly worded denials, and its selective quoting of documents. The report states that 365 interviews were conducted, but only summarizes statements from 12 individuals connected to the South Central Los Angeles specific allegations. I have a list of over 70 individuals who should have been interviewed under oath by the CIA if the investigation was to be considered credible. Did the CIA interview all of these people? Because the report fails to list who was actually interviewed. We have no way of knowing. In addition, only 40 pages of this report, titled The California Story, actually deal with the allegations of the South Central crack cocaine Contra connection. The report mentions a half dozen other CIA and Contra officials interviewed, but does not offer even a cursory summary of their testimony. So let me do what the report failed to do. The following individuals associated with the Contras are or were either CIA agents or CIA assets. Now, I'm going to name these individuals, and I'm going to say to you, Mr. Chairman and members, that even though the report cleverly refers to agents, we should be talking about agents and or assets. I am going to say to you today in no uncertain terms, Mr. Adolfo Calero was a CIA asset. And he didn't just start with Norman Meneses. He started working with the American Embassy as a CIA asset, and many of the funds for aid were funneled through him. Mr. Enrique Bermudez was a CIA asset. Mr. Marcos Aguado, a Contra pilot and accused drug dealer. Mr. Francisco Aviles, a Contra official in Costa Rica. In the Frogman case, Mr. Ivan Gomez, CIA agent who accepted drug money from Mr. Meneses. Mr. Dagoberto Nunes, who ran a shrimp company for the Oliver North in Costa Rica. Rene Corvo, a Cuban-American who worked with the Contras in Costa Rica. Mr. Francisco Shanz, owner of the shrimp company for Oliver North in Costa Rica. Mr. Edmundo Meneses, American-trained Nicaraguan general and Norman Meneses' brother. Mr. Sebastian Gonzalez, Contra leader in Costa Rica and drug partner of Meneses. I assert here today that these are all CIA assets, and I would challenge this committee to ask the Inspector General and others, perhaps in the CIA, to document for you whether or not my allegations are true. They should give you sworn testimony as to whether or not they have knowledge about the people that I'm submitting to you being assets of the CIA. Today, I'm asking this committee to obtain the written response from the CIA that either categorically confirms or denies they are or were CIA assets or agents. Another major problem with the investigation underlying the report was the CIA's lack of subpoena power. This meant that some of the most important CIA and other officials were never interviewed. 3 former unnamed senior CIA managers would only respond in writing. 6 other key CIA personnel and former DE agent Castillo refused to be interviewed. The CIA agents included Dwayne Claridge, Joseph Fernandez, and Clara George. All of these senior CIA officials had major responsibilities for the CIA's Contra operation. There can be no thorough investigation without sworn testimony from each of these individuals. They should be subpoenaed. Jose Fernandez was the former CIA station chief in Costa Rica, while the Meneses drug organization was operating from there. Dwayne Dewey Claridge was the CIA officer who helped create the Contras at a time when the Onassis Ring first began dealing cocaine for the FDN. His name also appeared in Oliver North's notebooks as being responsible for making quid pro quo deals with known drug king Manuel Noriega. Clark summed up how serious he thought this investigation was when he told reporters in December
They built that man up to take him down, y'all. That's crazy. They build motherfuckers up to take him down.
Bullshit, and
like they did Mumia Abu Jamal.
A bunch of bullshit. When I spoke
Muammar Gaddafi, I'm sorry.
the release of the report
They did that shit to Muammar Gaddafi,
much
too.
to my surprise, they had to admit to me
And,
they had not
Hussein,
even read the
Saddam
entire
Hussein.
report. They admitted they had only read the glossy
Build them up to tear them
8-page
down.
summary, which offered
Then eventually
unsubstantiated
unalive
conclusions of the CIA's innocence and blanket denials of the Dark Alliance serious allegations. Had they only read the report in its entirety as I did, they would have learned that allegations of drug trafficking and connections between the Contras and the CIA were not new. In fact, the report even lists and summarizes some of the other investigations that found Contra involvement in drug trafficking. For example, the Senate Subcommittee on Terrorism, Narcotics, and International Operations, chaired by Senator John Kerry, conducted a 2-year investigation into allegations of Contra involvement in drugs and arms trafficking. The CIA Inspector General report summarizes some of the Kerry Commission's 1,166-page report's devastating findings on page 35 through 38. These are some of the admissions. Drug traffickers use the Contra war and their ties to the Contra as cover for their criminal enterprises in Honduras and Costa Rica. Assistance from the drug laws was crucial to the Contras. And the traffickers, in turn, promoted and protected their operations by associating with the Contra movement. Drug traffickers provided support to the Contras and used the supply network of the Contras. Contras knowingly received both financial and material assistance from the drug traffickers. In each case, one or another U.S. government agency had information regarding these matters either while they were occurring or immediately thereafter. Members of the Contra movement were involved in drug trafficking, including pilots who flew supplies for the Contras, mercenaries who worked for the Contras, and Contra supporters throughout Central America. Drug traffickers helped in the Contra supply operations through business relations with Contra groups. Drug traffickers contribute cash, weapons, planes, pilots, air supply, services, and other materials to the Contras. U.S. Department funds authorized by Congress for humanitarian assistance was paid to drug traffickers. In some cases, these drug traffickers received the State Department's funds after having been indicted by federal law enforcement agencies on drug charges. In other cases, were the subject of pending investigations by those agencies. The FDN Contra Group moved Contra funds through a narcotics, drug trafficking, and money laundering operation. Drug trafficking for the Contra movement was done by some because they were told that their actions were either on behalf of or sanctioned by the U.S. government. Not included in the CIA IG report are other key findings by the Kerry Committee. Despite widespread trafficking through the war zones of northern Costa Rica, the Kerry Committee was unable to find a single case which was made on the basis of a tip or a report by an official of a U.S. intelligence agency. This, despite an executive order requiring intelligence agencies to report drug trafficking to law enforcement officials, and despite direct testimony that drug trafficking on the Southern Front was reported to the CIA officials. U.S. officials involved with the Contras knew that drug traffickers were using the Contra infrastructure and that the Contras were receiving assistance from drug profits. Yet they turned a blind eye and did not report these
Maxine
individuals to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. How can this report include these incriminating findings by elected officials, including Senators Kerry, Brock, and Monahan, while others...
Barack, y'all heard that, right?
Summarily, how can this report
let's hear it one more again.
Include these incriminating findings by elected officials, including Senators Kerry, Brock, and Monahan, while others...
Kerry, all of them knew about it, y'all.
Summarily,
conspiracy carried more weight than the person who pulled the trigger.
Dismissing any CIA knowledge of or
no one held accountable.
Contra drug trafficking into the U.S. This is an outrageous contradiction. Moreover, the report is littered with damaging admissions. This report admits Norman Menezes was one of the biggest drug dealers in America, either north and south. And he supplied Danilo Blandone. Blandone, in turn, was the source who supplied Ricky Ross. And Blandone and Menezes did so unhindered by the CIA. It is unreasonable to think Menezes was connected to the CIA.
Rick Ross was getting it.
Given the Contras were a CIA creation, and that the CIA handled every aspect of the Contra operation. Pages 20 through 24 of this report confirms that the CIA essentially created, funded, supplied, and trained the Contras, and that the CIA was intimately involved in determining their strategy and running their operations. Menezes was never arrested by U.S. law enforcement. He was permitted free entrance to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue?
You fighting for him now, no, Maxine?
Menezes dealt drugs in the United States for over 10 years or more. Starting back in 1974, he was a drug dealer before he came to the United States. He was even involved in a murder in Nicaragua. He dealt drugs without any interference, without any intervention. He had assets and businesses in San Francisco. As a matter of fact, Congresswoman Pelosi referred to the Frogman case. When they tracked down some of Menezes' people, they tracked them to the very house that was connected with the Frogman case where many of those people were involved. Menezes was well known by the CIA,
she's been in that goddamn house forever.
The DIA, and everybody in the United States as a drug dealer who was supplying Danilo Blandone, who was supplying Ricky Ross.
Who?
Menezes was well known by the CIA,
the
DEA,
CIA,
the DIA, and everybody in the United States as a drug dealer who was supplying Danilo Blandone, who was supplying Ricky Ross. How he stayed in the United States all of those years, being known from 1974, selling drugs that ended up helping to support the Contras, and nobody knew it, is absolutely amazing. Menezes was never arrested by the U.S. enforcement. He was permitted free entrance again to the United States and even issued a visa. How was this allowed, and why was it allowed to continue? The CIA and DEA records are full of knowledge about Menezes' drug dealing operation. This knowledge was substantiated in this report. Even this report. The CIA knew of his drug trafficking by 1984, and the DEA had known of his trafficking activities as early as 1974. Incredibly, the report fails to mention anything about the activities of Adolfo Calero, only mentioning that he was interviewed. He was the key Contra leader and CIA agent on the Southern Front. Damning public information ties Calero to drug trafficking. In a December 1986 interview, Calero told the Costa Rican newspaper La Nación that he met with drug kingpin Norman Meneses at least 6 times, and that he knew Meneses was involved in drug trafficking. Now, in our investigations, we had found out that Meneses had met with Adolfo Calera, and that Meneses and Brandon had been going to these meetings both in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, despite the fact that these conclusions of these drug dealers having no connection to the Contras. Thank goodness your report did identify 6 visits. We only knew about 2. We have a picture of Meneses and Adolfo Calera and others at one of these Contra meetings that were going on all over California. In addition, there are many other key facts that were confirmed by this report. Drug kingpin Norman Meneses supported and was involved with the Contras. On page 76-77, drug dealer Norman Meneses admitted giving money to the California chapter of the FDN Contras and that he was involved in the 1985 attempt to obtain material support, medical and general supplies for the Contra movement. Now, there are a lot of discrepancies about how much. You will find in your report it differs somewhat with information that was testified to over on the Senate side when they held the semblance of a hearing over there. I have maintained that it does not matter how much money. It does not matter whether or not
like Joe
it was
Biden.
as Eden
It doesn't matter
testified
if we created them.
Side,
it doesn't matter
only got a few $1,000
if we experimented on them. We gotta lock them up.
It is an admission
Sounds just like Joe, didn't she, y'all?
Supplied about $40,000 plus medical supplies and other things. The fact of the matter is, the reason I'm so interested in this and the reason I'm so outraged by it, as a public elected officials, all of us must be concerned that our government could have anyway been involved in drug trafficking. Drug trafficking. That's a very, very serious offense against the people of this nation. Must be concerned that our government could have anyway been involved in drug trafficking. Drug trafficking. That's a very, very serious offense against the people of this nation. We cannot afford to have our government, I don't care under what pretense, a covert operation or any kind of operation involved in drug trafficking. Page 70 to 71 of the report documents the connection between CIA asset and FDN military leader Enrique Bermudez, Meneses, and Brandon. Brandon and Meneses traveled to Bolivia in 1982 to make a drug deal and stopped en route to Honduras. While in Honduras, Brandon and Meneses met Bermudez for the second time. Bermudez asked Brandon and Meneses to help raise money and supplies for the FDN. He let the drug traffickers know that their support would be welcome because, I quote, and everybody quotes, even your reported quotes, that he said, the ends justifies the means. Brandon then describes how he and Meneses were escorted to airport by armed Contras after the meeting with Bermudez. Brandon left the meeting. He left this meeting with $100,000 in a bag to buy drugs. The profits from the sale of these drugs were to be used to buy supplies and fund the Contras. Brandon tells of how he ran into trouble at the airport in Honduras when he was caught with the $100,000. But guess what? Just like in the Frogman case, where they caught them with the dope and the money, and they returned the $36,000 based on that attorney general that you had in San Francisco having been told that it was Contra money. This man with $100,000 in drug money to buy more drugs for more supplies was assisted by the Contras at the airport. And even though they had stopped him, they had taken $100,000 out of his brief. With the intervention of the Contras, they gave it back to him. And he went along his merry way. Where did the $100,000 come from?
begin to conclude the remarks.
Yes, I'm going to get there.
We've been over generous. We're taking away from time for the.
I appreciate Mr. Goss, and I
know you
tried to
have
say
written
that
remarks, which we will accept for the record without objection.
Where did the 100,000 come from? Did they give back the 100,000 to Blandon because of the Contra CIA connection? Well, Mr. Chairman and members, it's hard to refute and to help educate in 10 minutes. I'm going to submit this for the record, but I'm going to close by saying this. This report is not credible. This report does not do the job, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to submit this for the record, but I'm going to close by saying this. This report is not credible. This report does not do the job, Mr. Chairman. We owe it to ourselves as public policy makers to do something. Why do I do all of this? Because I want to find some CIA operatives, assets, or agents and somehow convict them. That's not going to happen. And I don't believe that, and that's not what I'm trying to do. I am trying to raise the level of this discussion because we've got some work to do as public policy makers. The least we could do is develop public policy that will indicate that drug trafficking can never be used in any covert operation, no matter what is being attempted. We cannot continue to put our heads in the sand. It's a shame what happened with the Kerry report. The idea that members of the Congress of the United States on the Senate side could have presented us with so much documentation, and then years later we have the investigation that was done by the San Jose Mercury, and we find more information about drug trafficking, and either the CIA absolutely knowing or turning its head, and we still can't come up with public policy. At the same time, we're spending millions of dollars talking about a war on drugs. Give me a break, Mr. Chairman and members. We can do better than this. I will not go away, members. I cannot go away. My community has been devastated, as many communities across this nation. As a result of this work, I've been in at least 7 or 8 states with town hall meetings, including New York and New Jersey and St. Louis, and I continue to have several requests every week to come and do town hall meetings and radio stations because people are outraged and concerned about the fact that somehow this drug problem won't go away, and the idea that the government could be involved. I challenge this committee to get involved with public policy that would get our government out of ever being involved in any way. And while you're doing this, why haven't something been said about General Davila in Honduras, who also was a CIA asset that was caught putting a ton of drugs into the airplane? The drugs found its way into the United States and was sold on the streets, and that was recently, and we still haven't heard a word. When I check with the Justice Department, they tell me they can't say anything. And I suppose you have information you can't say anything about. But I think somehow we've got to do better. The lives of our children and our communities are at stake. I thank you, and I submit this for the record and more information and documents if you would like to have it.
It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my
now they
wife,
created
your
this
husband,
situation. Now let's
mother,
listen to
your
this
parents. It doesn't matter
hypocrite
whether or
as
not
Joe
they were
Biden
deprived as
character
youth.
that y'all
It
elected.
doesn't matter whether or not they had no background that enabled them to.
It doesn't matter if the CIA planted it in the community. It doesn't matter.
Socialize into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether
Sound
or
like
not they're
Maxine
victims
Waters,
of
right?
society.
It doesn't
The
matter.
result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been
Maxine.
socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets.
Wow.
That society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean if we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets. That society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forget that we have predators on our streets. That society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society.
We dropped the dope in their communities with the help of the CIA, the DEA.
Beyond the pale.
Nobody held accountable, y'all.
Commentary on society.
Ain't that crazy, y'all? So what you think gonna happen down the road with that Jab 19?
And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point.
Wow.
That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it. And even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate.
Wow.
But there is a consensus, and I will cease.
Wow.
We must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malfactor in society. I don't care why someone is
if the CIA dropped dope in their community. I don't care.
We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society.
Look at that, y'all. They created that shit,
Try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it.
But y'all created the situation, though.
Away from my mother, your husband, our families.
Nobody held accountable, man.
But we would be absolutely stupid.
Wow, these motherfuckers are devils, man.
If we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured.
For real, that's devil activity, y'all.
Still exist. And we must deal with that.
Wow.
Nigger mayor, we don't need it. We already have a nigger mayor. We don't need any more nigger big shots.
Yeah, he's a low-down racist.
They're gonna put you all back in chains. Have a nigger mayor. We don't need any. We already have a nigger mayor. We don't need any more nigger big shots.
Yeah, he's a low-down racist.
They're gonna put you all back in chains.
I had spent years writing what became known as the Biden crime bill.
Everybody talks about 94, the crime bill.
The Biden crime bill.
But you need to talk about 7980 when he pushed a Reform Act through on federal sentencing. So 10 Rocks got sentenced as a kilo of pure cocaine. So they abolished federal probation and parole, and you get sentenced in on a federal case. You serve damn near all of it. You don't get out early. So, yeah, that.
I like the idea they keep in jail longer. I'm the guy that wrote the bill requiring federal judges to keep people in jail 100% of the time for which they're sentenced, and the notable exceptions only 85%. So I'm all for tougher enforcement.
You know? Yeah, he's a low-down racist.
They're gonna put you all back in chains. We already have a nigger mayor. We don't need any more nigger big shots.
Yeah, he's a low-down racist.
They're gonna put you all back in chains.
I had spent years writing what became known as the Biden crime bill. The Biden crime bill. Kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids.
I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, and you ain't black.
Yeah, he's a low-down racist.
Homes was planned on a minimum budget. There are few places for children to play. Because of the same kind of planning, Perry Homes has no doctor, no dentist, no pharmacy. Nearby, there is a well baby clinic, but no sick baby clinic. and the sick must travel 12 miles to wait for attention at Grady Memorial Hospital. And partly because of the general rule that welfare is cut off if there is a man in the house, fathers are often driven away so that mother and children can eat. Homes was planned on a minimum budget. There are few places for children to play. Because of the same kind of planning, Perry Homes has no doctor, no dentist, no pharmacy. Nearby there is a well baby clinic, but no sick baby clinic. And the sick must travel 12 miles to wait for attention at Grady Memorial Hospital. And partly because of the general rule that welfare is cut off if there is a man in the house, fathers are often driven away so that mother and children can eat.
85% of the head of household is a woman, because most of the men who should be in the household, they cannot make a decent living. And of course it is better to know that a child will be fed 12 months out of the year than 3 months, which is during the summer when construction work you can make a decent living.
The man in the house rule was written to prevent welfare cheating, to make sure that aid to families with dependent children would go only to families headed by mothers. But the effect of the man in the house rule is to create for children an atmosphere of investigation and surveillance. And thus, the welfare system in its operation turns out to be a system to make life harder for children.
Democrats want do Democrats want to prioritize the health care of illegal aliens over a government shutdown? Because if the government does shut down, American
Excuse me, stop it right there. We're not prioritizing. What we're doing is saying simply we want to keep the government open, and we want to work with the Republicans and have a bipartisan agreement to keep this government open, and health care is at the top of our agenda.
But aren't Democrats demanding health care for illegal aliens?
Democrats are demanding health care for everybody. We want to save lives. We want to make sure that health care is available to those who would die, but having the help of their government.
So you're good with the government shutdown, even if it means giving health care to people who aren't American citizens?
Well, that's what you're pushing on. What you're trying to do is you're standing here and you're trying to make me say that somehow we're going to put non-citizens over Americans. Quit it. Stop it. This is the kind of journalism we don't need.
No, I'm just
you're divisive. No, you're not.
Yeah, no,
you're being divisive. No, please. You don't need to ask that question. You're just trying to get controversy here. You're not going to get it from me. We want to save health care for all people. Thank you. I don't know why you're in my city. You did
getting them illegal migrants
the
up.
governor was not contacted.
Fought on that in '98,
this is
right?
Trump and his outrageous attempt to not only target our sanctuary city, but to frighten us and intimidate us. This is wrong, and I hope that none of you will use those guns to shoot anybody. There's no reason to shoot anybody. Don't allow them to make your service in a service where you're killing people. Don't do it. Defy them. Don't shoot those guns for anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, so with all that stuff happening last night, what did Democrats do when they got up this morning, right? Well, they went back to the same old playbook of gaslighting, which is basically pretending that there was no violence, right? There are no riots, there's no chaos, there's no destruction happening in LA, right? Everything that you're saying is a lie, right? Don't believe it, which is essentially is what Maxine Waters is arguing here. Take a look.
Protests, and even those who were out of step with what we are advocating, peaceful protest, did not create any violence. Nobody was shot. Nobody was killed. Get it in your head. And so when martial law is called, what are you going to say? I missed the point. Don't miss the point, you all.
don't think that somehow, because they called out the National Guard, there was violence. There was no violence. I was on the street. I know. And I went from downtown detention back out into the community, talking to people what happened in Paramount, what happened in Compton, what happened in Inglewood. So, first of all, get it straight. And don't just rely on what you're being told or the few incidents that you saw.
Wow. This is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Democrats just are incapable of learning from their mistakes. One of the reasons why they lost in 2024 is because of the constant gaslighting. And instead of learning from their mistake and say, you know what, let's actually tell the American people the truth. Let's stop gaslighting. Let's stop lying. Right? I mean, we just finished talking about one of the biggest gaslighting campaigns from the mainstream liberal media, the Democrats, which is the cover up of Joe Biden's mental decline. They haven't learned. They went right back to the same playbook. Well, let's just lie to the American people. Let's just tell them, don't believe your eyes. Your eyes are lying to you. You didn't see looting. You didn't see attacks on police. You didn't see explosions. You didn't see people, trying to murder officers, right? Because that's
this cute little vial here. It's crack, rock cocaine, the most addictive form. You think it's the glamour drug of the 80s? Well, that's the point of this fronted little reminder. It can kill you. And if you've got to die for something, this sure as hell ain't it.
The drug epidemic is as dangerous as any terrorist that we face. It is serious. It is an epidemic, and it can kill.
The crack problem has become a crack crisis, and it's spreading nationwide.
And this is the most addicting thing that probably ever existed in the world.
A whole generation has been condemned to death.
In the 1980s, the United States faced an unprecedented crisis. First in Los Angeles, then across the rest of the country. A new drug spread like wildfire. Crack. A cheap version of cocaine, as accessible as it was destructive. In just a few years, it devastated poor neighborhoods, shattered entire families, and fueled violence, particularly within the black community. A sudden epidemic that, at the time, was anything but accidental. You could even say it was orchestrated. Its origin took shape from far American streets, in a Central American country with a crucial stake, Nicaragua. At that time, tensions between the United States and the Soviet bloc were still at their peak. From the shadows of this global conflict, the CIA orchestrated a covert operation to support the Contras, a far-right paramilitary group opposed to Nicaragua's socialist regime. The goal? Stop the spread of communism, no matter the cost. And that cost? The CIA turned a blind eye to cocaine being imported to finance the Contras, weapons for Central America, and cocaine for the United States. A silent and lucrative traffic tolerated in the name of higher interests. And so, a clandestine market took shape, and an epidemic emerged, one where drugs flooded American streets and fueled gang violence. The result? Devastated neighborhoods, sacrificed generations, and a truth that remained in the shadows for far too long.
Cocaine and drugs are destroying this country, and it's going to get worse.
Why is it going to get worse?
Because we're out of control. We are out of control.
Unfortunately, drawn from a true story. This documentary is based on the work of Gary Webb, an investigative journalist who, at the cost of his own life, exposed the CIA's role in the importation of cocaine and the spread of crack in the United States. The facts presented in this video rely on his extensive investigations, particularly his book Dark Alliance. The narrative approach used here serves only one purpose: to make the message more impactful. But where am I?
He's awake, boss. Grayson. Grayson!
Who are you?
That's not important. What matters is the truth, Grayson. Nothing else. The truth about this operation. About what you did.
What are you talking about? Untie me, for fuck's sake!
You know very well what we're talking about. Remember, crack flooding the streets of LA, the neighborhoods left to rot, kids armed to the teeth, broken families, and all the deaths that came from that shit. All that for a war thousands of miles away. A war that didn't even concern your country.
No, I don't see it. Go fuck yourselves. I won't tell you anything.
We're not gonna beat around the bush. Norwin Meneses, the Nicaraguan Baron. Danilo Blandon, the liaison. And Freeway Ricky Ross, the crack king of South Central. All roads lead to you, Grayson.
You don't know anything. You have no idea what really happened.
We want the truth. The shipments, the money transfers, the weapon deliveries, the CIA, the Contras, all of it. Talk, Grayson. Tell us how it all started.
Fine! Spill it! That's what you want.
Start from the beginning. Tell us about Nicaragua, Grayson.
The beginning? You mean July 1979. A dictator in his bunker, surrounded on all sides. Anastasio Somoza. The last of a dynasty that had ruled for nearly half a century. His family had controlled Nicaragua with an iron fist since 1936.
Anastasio Somoza worked for you?
For us? Somoza did whatever we asked. He was our man. When the CIA needed backing in Central America, we went to him. In 1954, he helped us topple a pro-communist president in Guatemala. In 1961, he lent us a secret base for bombing Cuba during the Bay of Pigs invasion. 4 years later, he sent his men to crush a leftist uprising in the Dominican Republic. Hell, he even sent Nicaraguans to fight in Vietnam to keep Washington happy.
So why did you abandon him?
Because the wind had changed. The Sandinista revolutionaries, backed by Cuba and the USSR, were already at Managua's gates, the nation's capital. And in Washington, our image was starting to take a hit. La Guardia, Somoza's National Guard, was massacring civilians, torturing dissidents. It didn't look good. Too visible, too dirty. His murderous, corrupt apparatus was violating human rights. So we turned our back on Somoza, as if all that blood had never happened.
You Americans. And how did he take it?
Well, he felt betrayed. He begged the U.S. ambassador to Nicaragua. He reminded him of everything he'd done for us, like a loyal soldier. But our decision had already been made. Somoza was no longer useful. He was gonna fall. So we tried one last move. He put La Guardia on the table. That private militia. We built it in the 1930s. Trained it in our bases. He told us, if I go down, La Guardia goes with me. And that scared us. We'd invested millions in that structure, arming it, training its officers in the complex arts of anti-communism. La Guardia was our bulwark against the red threat in Nicaragua. Our lever to keep influence, no matter who replaced him. The U.S. ambassador promised he would do everything to preserve it. But in reality, it was already over. Somoza slipped away like a thief on the night of July 17th, 1979. 2 private jets, his generals, his cronies, all bound for Florida. And La Guardia? It collapsed within hours. The Sandinistas entered Managua without firing a shot. They declared the end of the dictatorship, the end of La Guardia. Those who managed to flee crossed borders. The others ended up in prison or executed. End of a dictatorship. But it also marked the beginning of a covert war financed by cocaine. And while that old regime was being buried, in Washington they were already talking about something else. Not Nicaragua. Cocaine. Members of Congress were starting to panic. Cocaine from South America, Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, was becoming almost fashionable. It was mentioned in the paper, celebrated in songs, shown in films, often in an oddly positive light. In Congress, a staunchly conservative representative, Tennyson Geyer, cried epidemic. He demanded measures, a war on drugs, but the rest of the country wasn't listening. For many, cocaine wasn't even considered a drug, just an elite indulgence, a chic powder supposedly to refine the look and sharpen the mind. At $2,500 for 30 grams, it was the drug of the privileged, the well-born. Congress? They didn't care. Even experts said coke wasn't dangerous, not addictive.
Wow.
But elsewhere, far from U.S. borders, another version of cocaine was beginning to make headlines. In Peru, in Bolivia, a brown, sticky paste smoked in hand-rolled cigarettes. They called it pasta basica, the cocoa paste. It was the precursor to crack. For heavy users, it had everything to seduce. You could smoke as much as you wanted. No snorting, no waiting for the nose to absorb the powder. This was instant. The vapors hit the lungs directly. The effect was brutal. Not only faster, this paste was far purer, up to 80% cocaine content, compared with barely 20 to 30% for powdered coke. And most importantly, it cost next to nothing. A cheap, powerful, accessible drug. But the flip side was savage. The high lasted only minutes, and if you didn't follow up immediately with another dose, you sank into an abyssal depression. A hellish loop. Once you started, you couldn't stop. Peruvian psychiatrist of the time warned. Hallucinations, paranoia, lightning-fast addiction. Hundreds of men ruined, burned out, dehumanized by this new form of cocaine. But who listened? Reports were in Spanish. Nobody took them seriously. Still, a Los Angeles researcher sounded the alarm. Ronald Siegel. A respected toxicologist, he'd studied cocaine's effects for years, in labs and in the field. Reading a Peruvian psychiatrist's reports on the cocoa paste, he realized something troubling. This new mode of consumption was no longer confined to South America. It was crossing borders and beginning to show up in Los Angeles. What Siegel discovered next was even more alarming. With their taste for innovation, Americans had found a way to go further. To turn powdered cocaine into a smokable form, even purer and more destructive. A simple chemical process freed the base by removing the element that made it water-soluble. They called it freebase, a smokable cocaine unlike anything anyone had tried before. And at that point, we were one step away from crack. In short, Ronald Siegel rang the alarm, as did other scientists. Data, testimonies, evidence, it was all there. This new drug drove people mad. Young people burned from the inside. Psychiatric clinics overflowing in Peru and Bolivia. And already disturbing signs in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York. Faced with these warning signs, a few voices rose to the top of the state. In Washington, one name stood out. Dr. Robert Bick, neuropharmacologist, Yale professor, known for editing Freud's work on cocaine. He was present the day the conservative representative Tennyson Geyer shouted about the cocaine pandemic, seated calmly during long hearings. He waited his turn. When he spoke, Geyer introduced him respectfully, praising his very, very impressive credentials. And Robert Bick did not mince words. He denounced the misinformation spread by the government. He warned of what he saw as an imminent catastrophe. We do not yet have an epidemic of freebase or smoking cocoa paste in the United States, but it is very likely that this could happen. He therefore called for a nationwide information campaign. We must show what happens when this drug is used, to prevent a potential epidemic. But the room didn't want to hear that. No budget, no campaign, just a curt question.
List on apartments.com.
What is the DEA doing to stop Bolivians and Peruvians from cultivating coca?
Nothing.
Yeah, these guys didn't grasp the gravity of what was coming. Because ultimately, that poison wouldn't stay on the slopes above Lima. It was going to come down the hills and into American streets.
What they created, an epidemic, like the pandemic, plandemic.
When
Always
truth is buried
experimenting on the
underground,
people.
it accumulates there with such explosive force, it blasts everything away with it. Emile Zola.
Get back to Nicaraguan, Grayson. What happened after Somoza fled the country?
Yeah, Nicaragua. At that point, everything was collapsing. The Sandinista rebels were advancing. Somoza was finished. The Guardia was imploding. And while the local aristocracy was fleeing like rats, a man showed up in Los Angeles on July 5th, 1979. His name? Oscar Danilo Blandon Reyes. A Nicaraguan exile, but not just anyone. Blandon was the son of a major landowner, married to an heiress from one of the most powerful families in Nicaragua. He had everything. Wealth, connections, influence, exile. But not just anyone. Blandon was the son of a major landowner, married to an heiress from one of the most powerful families in Nicaragua. He had everything. Wealth, connections, influence, and then in a matter of weeks, nothing. No more land, no more privileges. Forced to start from scratch in a country he knew nothing about. In Los Angeles, Blandon joined his family, who had arrived before him. But there was no way he was going to roll over and die. The Nicaraguan exile got moving again and found a job at a small used car lot run by two other compatriots, the Torres brothers. Nicaraguan giants who lived with two cousins of Pablo Escobar. Back then, the Torres brothers weren't yet in the cocaine trade, but it wouldn't take long. Same for Blandon. With that moment, started reaching out to old contacts, fellow Nicaraguans. At first, to talk about the country, exile, humiliation. Then the meetings became regular, more serious, and little by little, an idea took shape. Organize a resistance from the United States.
We created a group in Los Angeles.
We created.
There were 5 of us. We called it the FDN, the Nicaraguan Democratic Force.
Democratic Force.
That was the early stage of what would become the Contras. But in truth, the FDN didn't exist yet. At that time, late 1979, early 1980, the money Blandon was collecting mainly went to support the Legion of September 15th, a group of Somoza veterans based in Guatemala, made up of the dictator's former bodyguards. It was only in August 1981 that the CIA merged several exile groups, including the Legion, to officially create the FDN, which would become the main Contra force.
And the CIA in all this? You're dancing around it, Grayson. Tell me how they got their hands in it.
Well, they waited until things were taking shape. When they saw that the Nicaraguan exiles were organizing, they sent an emissary, Enrique Bermudez, a former Guardia colonel, trained by the Americans and connected to the Pentagon. He was a trusted man, well regarded in Washington. On paper, it was clean.
Yeah, Reagan.
In 1980, the CIA contacted Bermudez and offered him a mission: build a resistance army against the Sandinistas. To do that, the agency put him in contact with the Legion of September 15th, the group of Somoza's old veterans. And a year later, under his leadership, the FDN was officially born. After that, Enrique Bermudez arrived in Los Angeles to recruit reinforcements. And among those he approached, one Danilo Blandon.
Is that when the large-scale cocaine trafficking begins?
Not yet. At that point, Blandon was still just a penniless political exile. But now, thanks to Bermudez and the CIA, he had a cause, helping his country's resistance. In Los Angeles, Bermudez visited the small circle of Nicaraguans Blandon belonged to.
Bermudez came to a group meeting to give a speech of encouragement and asked that the group uphold the idea of a free and democratic Nicaragua. He wanted us to make the Contras cause known in the United States.
Bermudez asked them to take back the FDN's colors, name, and flag, but also to formalize their commitment, and above all, to find money, vehicles, logistics. So Blandon followed through. He took out a loan to buy a new pickup truck, pretended it was for personal use, and sent it to Honduras, where the Contras had set up their headquarters. It'd be the first vehicle sent from the United States for the rebellion, but the cause needed more. Weapons, logistics, funding to keep a guerrilla alive. So another way had to be found. And that's when cocaine became more than a business. It became a weapon.
So cocaine became a weapon to finance the war in Nicaragua. And Norwin Meneses? We know almost nothing about him, and yet he seems even more involved than Blandon. Tell us about him, Grayson.
Norwin Meneses. He was already in the business long before all that, before the Contras, before the word cartel became famous. In the 1970s in Nicaragua, he was considered the king of cocaine. Meneses was the Cali cartel's representative in the country, brother of a Guardia General, close to the regime and protected by Somoza. He ran nightclubs, brothels, and was already trafficking kilos of powder. The cops? He bought them. The judges? He knew them all. And he'd know Enrique Bermudez for a long time, a link going back to childhood, notably through his brother Edmundo, an officer and close friend of the commander. So when the Sandinistas took power, Norwin fled, like the rest. But he didn't go into hiding. No, he restarted drug trafficking, here, in the United States. San Francisco, Miami, LA. And it was in Miami that Meneses' fate crossed with Blandon's. One day, Danilo Blandon got a call. A former classmate, a well-connected exile, told him someone was about to arrive in Los Angeles, and he'd better listen to him. That someone was Norwin Meneses. Blandon waited for him at the airport. He'd heard the rumors, the stories. He knew this was a dangerous man. When they met face to face, Meneses got straight to the point. He laid out the plan. They needed to find money, fast, to send to Honduras. According to Blandon, that meeting had a very clear purpose: launch the movement, the Contras revolution. And for that, Meneses proposed a direct method: sell cocaine in Los Angeles to fund the war. Blandon would later confirm it, saying,
Norwin Meneses told me to traffic drugs in Los Angeles to raise money for the Contras. And that's how we started.
At first, Blandon hesitated. Selling cocaine to help his country's resistance wasn't what he'd imagined. But the idea took root, and if cocaine was the price to fund the revolution, so be it. Gazzetta, Narcotics Division, Los Angeles County. A guy who hated dealers more than most. One of them had killed his brother. So for him, it wasn't about justice anymore. It was personal. One day, Jerry Gazzetta started investigating a ridiculous detail. An unemployed guy who had bought 8 money-counting machines. Just a yellow light in the daily... 8 money-counting machines. Just a yellow light in the daily grind of a cop like Gazzetta. But for him, it was enough. He dug until he found 2 outsized figures. The Torres brothers. 2 giants with no visible criminal record, but bank accounts overflowing with cash. They were always in South Central, dropping off suitcases and picking up others. Gazzetta started watching them. Until the day he discovered that one of the Torres brothers was on probation for cocaine possession, enough to get a warrant. Result? On August 11th, 1986, Gazzetta and his colleagues raided the Torres' place. There, they hit the jackpot. $400,000 in cash hidden in a closet. But no trace of drugs. The Torres brothers were too smart. Like Blandon, they always kept the money separate from the product. If they were convicted, they risked, 3 years max? For Gazzetta, that wasn't enough. He needed better. So he had an idea. What if he tried to turn the Torres brothers into allies? The Torres brothers had a weak spot. Their girlfriends, who happened to be close relatives of the drug lord Pablo Escobar. So Gazzetta gave them an ultimatum. Either they cooperated, or their partners would be prosecuted, jailed, then deported. For the Torres brothers, that was unthinkable. In their culture, sacrificing family was worse than prison. And betraying a man like Escobar? That wasn't even an option. It was a guaranteed death sentence. Cornered, the Torres brothers finally gave in. And then, everything became clear. Through their confessions, a sprawling network appeared. Routes, safe houses, tons of coke, entire truckloads of cash. The Torres brothers estimated they had laundered nearly $100 million since January 1986. They claimed to have hidden between $250 and $500 million around Los Angeles, and to have over 1,000 kilos of cocaine in reserve. Gazzetta couldn't believe his eyes. He thought he was dealing with 2 bullshit artists. But when the Torres brothers took him to see the operation, Gazzetta saw the deliveries. Suitcases full of cash, 40 kilos of cocaine dropped off, $720,000 picked up in a few days. It was unbelievable. Every location had a purpose. An empty building was actually a conversion lab. Another, busier one, a distribution hub. And that brand new motel, the Freeway Motor Inn, Ricky Ross's base.
Freeway had a motel.
Besides turning in Ross, the Torres brothers also turned in Danilo Blandon. They revealed to Gutzetta how, for months, Blandon had supplied Ricky and Ollie. Now, thanks to him, cocaine deliveries never stopped. Investigators then understood that behind South Central, there was a channel, a real pipeline, stretching all the way back to South America. A protected, discreet route that no one had managed to identify until then. They also learned that Danilo Blandon wasn't just a supplier, but a man with murky connections. A man with access to confidential information, described by the Torres brothers as untouchable, protected by backers they themselves were afraid to name. On paper, it looked like a decisive victory. Except in reality, it was a dead end. Gutzetta and his colleagues actually had no way to establish direct proof that these individuals were involved in drug trafficking, or that all the merchandise belonged to them. So in the meantime, Blandon and Ricky kept flooding Los Angeles with crack. Every week, millions of dollars worth of cocaine was moving through the city, and strangely, even under the FBI's watch, Blandon continued his business without a hitch. Investigators then realized that, to strike hard, they had to target the man at the center of the crack market in South Central. That's how, on January 12, 1987, the Sheriff's Department and the LAPD joined forces to create January 12, 1987, the Sheriff's Department and the LAPD joined forces to create a special unit. The Freeway Rick Task Force. It was unheard of. An entire multi-jurisdictional brigade set up to take down a single man. At that point, Freeway Rick had clearly become law enforcement's top priority. The police were done listening to rumors and chasing shadows. They were going to wage war. He had to be taken down, not just for drugs, but as an example. An official report from the task force put it bluntly. Taking down Ricky Ross would send a powerful message to all of South Central, a clear warning. No one was untouchable. For some, like Gutzetta, it had become personal. Same with Steve Pollock, a veteran of the streets of South Central, who would watch crack turn neighborhoods into war zones. To him, Freeway Rick wasn't just a dealer. He was responsible for all that chaos, ground zero of a national epidemic. What he did was poison tens of thousands of people. Not just in LA. The cancer he unleashed spread across the entire United States. With police on his heel.
But as we know, Rick Ross don't got no planes and helicopters to deploy those drugs in the communities. It was the CIA who deployed the drugs in the community, sponsored by the government.
So Ricky Ross quickly felt the pressure. The Freeway Rick Task Force didn't let up. On January 21st, 1987, they hit hard. The Freeway Motor Inn was stormed like an enemy stronghold. Every room searched, cash seized, and an ultra-sophisticated radio device found, tapped into police frequencies. That same day, the task force raided Rick's mother's house. They found an Uzi and 2 bulletproof vests. When Ross called, furious to protest the search, Pollock didn't flinch. He wanted to bring down the crack king, destroy everything he'd built. In short, the raids kept coming and the blows multiplied. Things were looking bad for Ricky. By the end of January, the Freeway Rick Task Force was showcasing its trophies. 15 warrants executed, 5 arrests, nearly 4 kilos of crack seized, $63,000 in cash, 20 firearms. And above all, a detailed map of Freeway Rick's empire. The head of the task force would later admit, it wasn't a network, it was a goddamn cartel. Tons of cocaine. How this invisible alliance between narcos and federal agencies triggered the explosion of crack in black ghettos across America. A drug that had been virtually non-existent, and in just a few years, became a national epidemic. Dark Alliance was the first major journalistic investigation published simultaneously in print and online, a story that quickly went viral, shared by street activists, radio hosts, and political figures opposed to the Reagan and Bush administrations. The backlash was so intense, the CIA director himself had to take an unprecedented step, publicly defend the agency during a heated community meeting in Los Angeles.
Now, we all know that the U.S. government and the CIA supported the Contras in their efforts to overthrow the Sandinista government in Nicaragua in the middle 80s. Now it is alleged the CIA also helped the Contras raise money for arms by introducing crack cocaine into California. It is an appalling charge. It's a charge that cannot go unanswered. I have asked the CIA Inspector General to undertake a full investigation.
Faced with the scandal, the American press then turned on Webb himself. Instead of investigating the facts, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times mobilized to discredit the journalist. Isolated and demoted, Webb eventually resigned from the San Jose Mercury News. In 1998, the CIA's Inspector General finally admitted that the agency had indeed maintained ties with drug traffickers connected to the Contras, and that it had turned a blind eye to their activities, and sometimes even protected them. Ricky Ross, the crack king of South Central, would later claim he knew nothing about those connections. To him, Blandon was just a nice guy with a lot of cheap cocaine. After the trap set by the Nicaraguan in the DEA operation, Ross was sentenced to life in prison. He was eventually released in 2009 for good behavior. As for Blandon, he was never seriously prosecuted.
Wow.
He still served a 28-month prison sentence. Afterward, he obtained a U.S. permanent resident card and received payment from the DEA for his role as an informant.
Wow.
His own lawyer claimed that the CIA had approved his illegal activities. Norwin Meneses, a central figure in the network, was never arrested by U.S. authorities. It was only in Nicaragua, in 1991, that he was tried for drug trafficking. During his trial, a former military officer claimed that Meneses had openly financed the Contras by selling cocaine. Sentenced to 15 years in prison, he was released after 7. Multiple witnesses said Meneses enjoyed total protection. It should also be noted that in 1986, another scandal erupted. The Iran-Contra affair. The U.S. Congress discovered that the Reagan administration had sold weapons to Iran, despite an arms embargo, in order to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. Of the $30 million paid by Tehran, only $12 million was used to deliver the weapons that had been promised. The rest was diverted to arm the Contras. An operation carried out in direct violation of laws passed by Congress and approved at the highest levels of government. Several government officials were convicted, but none went to prison.
Wow.
Reagan, meanwhile, remained popular until the end of his term. Yet, despite the weapons and Iranian money, the Contras never managed to defeat the Sandinistas militarily. It was only after a bloody civil war, repeated sabotage, and constant pressure from the United States that the Sandinista regime finally gave way. Not to bullets, but at the ballot box. A center-right coalition, led by Violeta Chamorro, won the elections in February 1990. But what few people knew at the time was that this war, supposedly fought in the name of freedom, was also financed with cocaine. And that truth was inconvenient. On December 10th, 2004, Gary Webb was found dead in his home in California, with 2 gunshot wounds to the head.
Wow.
According to the official version, he took his own life.
How? 2 gunshot bullets to the head? How you gonna shoot yourself twice?
Give us some explanations. You, the president, and everybody else should be highly upset and say, how did this cancer get here? How did it happen?
I will tell you, Director Deutsch, as a former Los Angeles police narcotics detective, that the agency has dealt drugs throughout this country for a long time.
See, now you heard that.
Drugs, CIA does not encourage drugs.
How are we supposed to trust the CIA official to investigate themselves?
You want to know why black people don't believe in the government? Because we know what the government is capable of.
Don't
Experiment.
Conspiracy bullshit. Come on. You're a more intelligent man than that. Well, come on. I mean, come on. This there has never been a conspiracy.
And some of the money they were making was going to support an army that the men who ran the cocaine ring worked for, called the FDN. This was an army that the CIA started in 1981 and supported.
Better known to us, most of us who remember news, the Contras.
The report said 2 Nicaraguans, Danilo Blandon and Norwin Meneses, sold tons of cocaine to Los Angeles drug dealer Ricky Ross.
Did the CIA put drugs into the black community?
We don't have any evidence so far that they did it directly. And what we have evidence of is that men working for a CIA-run army did do that.
Is that love for you or hate?